Hello everyone. It appears we've come to the end of this very strange term, and I hope you're all doing well. If you have any questions about any of the assignments or the review, etc., please just contact me via email and we can set up a time to speak on the phone, or I can meet you and collaborate. So today I want to gather all the pieces together that we've been talking about throughout this course and kind of brainstorm together about how we could potentially make a better healthcare system across the board. So we'll be looking at a number of different ways that we could do this, and I'm really hoping that everybody will reflect and think about this also in terms of their own health and well-being. So I want to start out today looking at the way we can engage with ideas of possible change in terms of the individual. We'll be also looking at a larger scale social level a little bit later. But just to start, because I've been asking you to reflect on this through the course, is there a way that we as individuals can take what control we have and impact our own health and well-being? So I want to start out with the idea of a move beyond the metaphor of mind and body as machine. We've talked a lot about this at the beginning of the class, how the metaphors that we have for our body impact on how we engage with health and healing. So a lot of the religious traditions of the world, as you've already seen, and a number of you don't hold this metaphor, which is good, but a number of people in the secular Western world hold this idea, whether it's conscious or not, of the mind and body as machine. Is there a way we can move beyond this limiting metaphor? Also, can religious and spiritual traditions help us in this regard? Are there ways that they can weigh in? So for instance, we looked at the idea from the Chinese tradition that the body is a gift from the ancestors. We've seen in Judaism and Christianity that the body is viewed as sacred and created by God, etc. So can we start to think in terms of these much more open metaphors for understanding the human mind and body? Also, how can we cultivate a healthier life? Are there ways that we can on a daily basis engage with our health and well-being? So I'm going to ask you to reflect and think about, if you were to create a health plan for yourself, what would it look like? Would you perhaps think about ideas that you've looked at in this course or through your research and self-reflection? Are there ways you can think about engaging with your health that take on board moving beyond the metaphor of mind and body as machine? Or perhaps you think that it's a perfectly good metaphor, and if that's the case, you can make that argument too. Also, what do you need in life to keep all the aspects as understood in the model of the medicine wheel in balance? So this is another approach from the indigenous tradition that asks us to really think holistically about our health and well-being, and it moves us beyond the individual into the community and into the natural environment. So if you were to think about those quadrants, where would you sit now and where would you like to be? Many of you will know or have read about in the paper that we're facing an addiction crisis in North America, particularly opioid addiction. Certainly this is a huge problem in North Bay right now. And we seem to be at a kind of a dead end with how we approach addiction in our culture. It's very clear that simply getting somebody off a substance is not working. So are there ways that we can bring the insights of the religious and spiritual traditions that we've looked at in this course into the treatment of addiction? Now, this is already happening in the case of many indigenous communities, but are there ways we can do this across the board? So, for instance, I've asked you to think about the model of the Thamkrabak Monastery, in which they've had quite an incredible success with addiction, both with people from a Buddhist background and from outside, to the point where the Irish and English National Health Services have been paying for the flight of people to go there and take part in this rehabilitation process. Do you think we should develop institutions like this, or should we add these aspects into our own institutions? Is there a way that we could do this with integrity so that we could partake of the wisdom of religious approaches or spiritual approaches to healing? I want us now to expand our focus and think about the healthcare system in general. Usually in Canada, when we think about the healthcare system, we think of things like OHIP, and of course that's a very, very important aspect of healthcare. But hopefully at this point in the course, you see that health has a much broader implication. So can we draw on various approaches to healing that we've discussed in this course and bring them into mainstream healthcare? So we've looked at a variety of traditions. Are there aspects of this that we could bring into our system? So for instance, I'm going to be putting as a link some information about the plane tree model. That's just one model in which they brought in various alternative modalities right into the hospital system. Do you think this is a good idea? Do you think it would work? Do you think, for instance, we could cover these modalities under our current healthcare system and have them paid for? Can we improve the hospital experience so that it's patient-centered and no longer feels like moving into an alien culture? I just want us to think about whether or not we could imagine going into a hospital and experiencing it as a healing space, rather than one that I think many of us feel it feels very alienating and sterile. Certainly the hospice movement has given us a lot to think about in this regard, in ways in which we could create much more human and natural institutions in our culture. Do you think that we could move in some of these ideas from these various traditions? This is a drawing of the North Bay Parry Sound District Health Unit. It's on Oak Street, and I have walked by it many, many times, and every time I walk by, I have the urge to go in. And this is very strange, as I rarely feel that about hospitals or other healthcare settings in Ontario. But the way it has been designed architecturally and the use of trees and plants and light and so on makes it a very inviting space. So I think this is an excellent kind of example of how healthcare settings can be changed to make them much more welcoming and make people feel comfortable, make it a beautiful space. So once the COVID epidemic is over, I invite you to have a look at this building, walk around it, maybe even walk inside, and so that you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. Nipissing Serenity Hospice in North Bay opened its doors in January 2020. As you can see from this photograph, the rooms look out onto a beautiful natural setting. As we've talked about in this course, we know from ancient times that the Asclepions, for instance, took advantage of a natural environment. So Nipissing Serenity Hospice partakes of this philosophy, and it offers us a model, I think, for our entire healthcare system, which is completely patient-centered, but also family and friend-centered. So in hospice and palliative care, there's an emphasis on supporting the needs and well-being of the person's family and friends as well, so that they can support the person who is in the hospice. Coming to the end of our slideshow, I want us to think about potential relationships between traditional forms of healing and more secular forms as found in biomedicine. In a perfect world, could there be a relationship between traditional or religious forms of healing and biomedicine? Is there something biomedicine can learn from these forms? Also, can we bring these approaches into the mainstream? This is increasingly happening. We know that a large percentage of Canadians now are using different forms of alternative healing, such as traditional Chinese medicine. So for instance, should OHIP cover these treatments? Many of you are too young to remember that OHIP at one time did cover chiropractic treatment. Could we expand the system to cover these alternative forms of healthcare? Also, can we bring their insights into our larger system, not just in hospitals, but also, for instance, in social work or nursing? Should this be part of the curriculum, for instance, for people training in these fields? So I want you to think about this, because it always comes down to change coming through individuals within the system. And we can already see from examples that I've given in North Bay that this is happening. But are there sort of other ways that we could introduce these insights into our larger system?